there's one thing you can't afford during a divorce, it's a mistake. Unfortunately, when the right professionals aren't guiding you through the process, important details can slip through the cracks, and those oversights can lead to costly consequences, including a trip to court long after you thought your divorce was behind you. The good news is that many of these problems are preventable, and our next guest says there are simple steps you can take to protect yourself, avoid some of the common pitfalls, and make sure nothing gets overlooked. Joining us to share her expertise is one of our longtime contributors, Donna LaScala, president of Comprehensive Divorce Solutions. Donna is a certified divorce financial analyst, a divorce neutral, member of the Long Island Collaborative Divorce Professionals, the Association of Collaborative Professionals, and the Association of Divorce Financial Planners. Donna, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So why is it important for a licensed professional to review every financial account during a divorce action? And I'm talking about from bank accounts to investment portfolios, retirement accounts, 401ks, to make sure everything aligns with what has been written into that divorce agreement.
So having a CDFA involved in your divorce process is really crucial to the ultimate success of the outcome, because it's not only about how the numbers add up, it's about the details of how those assets and debts are then going to get divided. I call that the mechanics of it. So people get very caught up in the numbers. 100 here equals 100 there. But unfortunately, that's not always the case when it comes to things like a bank account versus a retirement account versus the marital residence versus a life insurance policy. These assets have very different tax structures, for one thing, and it's very important that the specifics of how those accounts are going to be divided gets laid out in very plain English in the divorce agreement so that no mistakes are made. Because the intention of what's being done has to match what then happens after the divorce is final. So if you're making mistakes from the very beginning with how these assets are going to be divvied up, it's going to be a mess trying to actually then execute what's being done or what's supposed to be done after the divorce is final.
As both a financial advisor and a financial neutral, how critical is it to scrutinize every single word in a settlement agreement to ensure every possible scenario has been addressed and nothing has been left open for interpretation or for exposure?
I can't stress this enough. Every word is critical, and being specific about every word is going to save you a lot of time and money post-divorce. So, one of the things that a lot of people deal with is child support. So, for example, when it comes to your children, you have to understand what child support is intended to do to begin with. So child support is meant to be used for the basic needs of a child, food, clothing, shelter. But, we all are living in reality, and we know that in our society there are many more things that go into raising a child that parents kind of look at as the necessities. But these are not things that are going to be covered by basic child support. I'm talking about things like music lessons, sports equipment, travel team expenses, graduations, proms, cars, camp, college. These are all ancillary expenses that are not covered by child support. So if your settlement agreement doesn't address these items line by line, item by item, they are ripe for misinterpretation as to how they're going to be handled. So imagine that you're getting divorced and your kids are 5 and 7. And then several years later, you're facing high school graduation, prom, applying for college, taking SATs. All of those things have expenses associated with them. But if you haven't thought it out and you haven't maintained the best terms with your ex, which unfortunately is very common, these things are going to cause complications. So now you've got to take your ex back to court. And if a judge doesn't see the specifics of how those items were meant to be handled in the agreement, if they're not there at all, then it's not enforceable. And then you have a costly mistake, because now you've got to get your ex to agree with you that this is how it should be handled.
Yeah, and that's a big one. And I know a lot of people do, including, because you were talking about when the kids are really young, things like cars and driver's ed, yet another thing that also goes overlooked. And speaking of overlooked during a divorce, talk to me about other things that get passed over and can create big problems later on.
So it's really not a matter of overlooking things. It's not understanding about how to handle those things. And the biggest issues are always caused by a lack of follow-through. So let's start with some basic concepts here. How accounts are titled is very important. If it's an individual account, if it's a joint account, if it's joint with someone other than your spouse, if it's an IRA, if it's a 401k, if it's the deed to the house, it's very, very important to understand and establish what the title is of each of those things, which is why I always ask for the actual statement of any account, bank account, credit card, everything. Spouses are assumed to own things jointly, and the title is usually joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Now, what does that mean? If one spouse dies, the asset is automatically 100% owned by the survivor. That's the rights of survivorship part. Retirement accounts, like 401ks, there's a provision that if you don't name your spouse as the primary beneficiary, you have to get your spouse to sign a waiver because it's assumed that this is the case, that your spouse is your primary beneficiary. So it's extremely important to understand that once you get divorced, these assumptions go away. However, it is imperative that the paperwork that follows matches the intent. If you have a marital residence and you're jointly on the deed and one person is keeping the house and the other one is not, that deed needs to be refiled. If you've got a life insurance policy where your spouse is the primary beneficiary and it's no longer intended to have your spouse be the primary beneficiary, you've got to file the appropriate paperwork. Beneficiary designations are extremely important, and they're very often overlooked because people feel like, okay, well, I'm divorced now, and this document says everything that I want to have happen. But the paperwork at the companies, the deed, the life insurance, the retirement account, the bank, does not match because it hasn't been updated. And that causes a huge, huge problem.
So what are the two most important things people can do to protect themselves and prevent future problems?
So first of all, working with a team of professionals is key. And it's not just the divorce professionals during the process. It's those people that are going to follow up with you after the process. If you have a financial advisor, it's important to bring them in to the process to let them know so they can tell you, oh, okay, so we need to refile your beneficiary designations. We need to make sure that whatever the intent is in this divorce decree is actually matching up to the paperwork at these companies. It's very, very important to have somebody that can look over that document because you've probably gone paper blind and you can't see it anymore when you're just the one looking at it. You've got to have someone else help you and say, oh, okay, so now we have to refile a deed. Let's contact a real estate lawyer because that needs to be done. It needs to be official. It needs to be refiled. So it's having all these other professionals come into the mix at a certain point to make sure that the follow-through is being done.
Yeah, there's an old saying, you get what you pay for. And even though people may think they are laying out a lot more money up front, it sounds like it could really save them in the long run because going back can be very expensive.
Oh, absolutely. And when you don't have the proper paperwork filed and then there is something that happens, like, for example, if you've cut an insurance policy and your spouse, now your ex-spouse, is still listed as the primary beneficiary and God forbid you pass away and that money was intended to go to your children, it won't. it will go to your former spouse because the proper paperwork was not filed with the insurance company to make sure that the proper beneficiary designation has been updated. It's the same thing with any estate planning documents that you have, like a healthcare proxy and a living will and all of those things. There is an assumption that the person responsible for making decisions for you is your spouse. Well, that person is no longer your spouse. Do you want them still to be your healthcare proxy? I doubt it, but you've got to update the paperwork, because without the proper paperwork, the assumption is still that the last person named is the person that you designated as your beneficiary or what have you. It's got to be done, and this is the biggest problem that people have. They suddenly go, oh my God, I forgot to do X, Y, and Z. So having a professional kind of looking over your shoulder going, wait a minute, there's another step, there's a follow-up step, there's a follow-through step, there's something else that needs to be done. If you don't do those things, anything that you have written in that document, that divorce decree, is not going to hold up in court.
You also have experience with mediation. So based on all your experience, how often do people find themselves back in court or sitting around the conference table with their lawyers trying to fix problems?
You know, it's unfortunate, but it's more often than I would like to admit, and it's more often than you think. Because a lot of times, especially those divorces that are, you know, maybe 5, 10 years old by now, there are so many things that have occurred that we have learned from in the legal profession, and things are constantly changing. Okay, so it's not that the people that wrote those agreements were incompetent. They weren't. It was just the landscape at the time. But if you've got something that's 5, 10 years old, and you didn't go through all of these steps, you're going to wind up back in court. And it's very, very unfortunate because, as you and I both know, the injured party is the one who is responsible for bringing the case back to court and then for proving that they've been wronged. The burden of proof is on the person who's been damaged. And that can be extremely costly. And sometimes it can't even be done in, say, family court or divorce court. It becomes a civil matter. And that's a whole nother ball of wax. So you really have to be very careful when you're looking over your agreement, what was decided, what was specifically noted, and what wasn't, because it might cost you a heck of a lot more money to fight it than you're actually going to see in your pocket. And that's the unfortunate part of this whole thing.
So if you can give divorcing couples one piece of advice, what would it be?
Have the right team. Make sure that you have your attorney or mediator. Make sure that if you're going through mediation, you want to have a review attorney. Make sure that you have a series of financial professionals, the CDFA before, during, and after divorce, your own financial advisor being brought into the mix. If you don't have one, get a referral for one, because that person can help you through the process go, okay, here are the things that need to be done immediately after. These are the things that I have to wait for the actual judgment of divorce to come through in order to do. These are the things that are for the future that I have to keep in mind. You've got to have a plan moving forward to execute the intention of your divorce decree. It's always about the professionals.
Donna LaScala, President of Comprehensive Divorce Solutions, thank you so much for joining us. We will be right back.
At Comprehensive Divorce Solutions, Donna LaScala provides the tools for people to deal with assets, debts, equitable distribution, and retirement in divorce negotiations. We hold your hand during and after the divorce process, providing a roadmap of what happens next and into the future. Divorce is difficult whether you're initiating it or not. It's fraught with emotion. When you deal with emotions, you are not dealing with logic, making it more difficult to decide what to do with your money. Hiring a professional to assist you in walking down the money path is crucial to avoiding potentially costly mistakes. Donna's goal is to make sure that each individual knows how they are going to be able to survive and thrive during and after divorce. As a CDFA trained mediator and collaborative financial neutral, Donna helps people get unstuck and move forward towards their post-divorce future. Call Donna LaScala at 516-218-6919, 516-218-6919.